of the high-paying jobs. All right, the markets are tanking, obviously, over the last couple of months. Dow is down 11% year to date. And of course, a lot of the growth stocks, we've talked about this over and over again, from Zoom to Netflix, Facebook, Spotify, Coinbase, Twilio, all down over 50%. Today, the market went down 5-6% on the news and then rebounded. Is this all priced in? And is this the bottom of the market? Cathie Wood is supposedly buying, and I don't know if it's net buying or she's just reallocating, but are we now in the bargain hunting period of the market and we've bottomed out?
The smart folks that I talk to, who I really look up to and respect, think that the bottom in the S&P is around 3,800, and that what we still need to do is this one last flush, and that last flush will really touch the big cap companies, but that growth is largely done, sort of getting taken to the woodshed. So general, I think that, generally buyers of growth now, sellers of value, and waiting for this one last, 400-point move down the S&P. And I think people think it's roughly the bottom. Now, if there's a world war, obviously, who knows, all bets are off. But,
So, Sacks, what's more shocking, that we're almost at the bottom, or there's people in the markets that Chamath really respects? Which is
well, speaking of people that we respect, so I think Brad Gerstner has a really interesting take on this, which is that.
Well, sorry, I should also be clear that I'm recruiting this one person who I really respect. He knows who he is.
So they're poachable. Got it.
Yeah.
So Brad Gerstner has published a couple of charts showing basically multiples in the Internet Index and among SaaS companies over the last, dozen years or so. And what you can see is that over the last 2 years during COVID, there was a huge spike in multiples for internet companies and for SaaS companies. And that over the last, really since November, the last 3-4 months, has now come down. And as of, I would say, last week, it was right at about the historical trend, and now it's starting to go under the historical trend. So from a bargain hunting standpoint, you'd have to say that this is the first time that we've been below the average for a few years. Now, that's not to say it can't go down even more, because in the same way that you can be above trend, you can also be below trend. And if this war escalates and metastasizes, it will go down more. But if this conflict can stay localized and the economy doesn't go into a recession because of everything that's happened, then yes, this might be bargain hunting.
Here's the chart for everybody to take a look at from January 20 to January 22, the 2 years of the pandemic. And I think this is times forward-looking sales, if I'm reading it correct. I don't have the full chart here. I just have a screenshot of it. A portion of it.
Yeah, I think it's enterprise value. Earnings. Yeah, it's enterprise value divided by like forward-looking revenue, which is you kind of say is like line. ARR. Yeah, it's sort of like ARR. It's like recurring revenue.
And so, yeah, we had this 15x. We went up to 40, 50x. Private market deals going at 100, 200x. Mm-hmm. Those days are over big time. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. One of the interesting things that I'm seeing is I think people are looking at businesses that have been corrected and saying, hey, what is the true value of this? And I think the best example is Peloton, new CFO, the CFO of Netflix.
I got to go.
All right.
I got to go, Jacob.
I love you. I love you, guys. I love you, Chamath, and stay safe and enjoy your vacation. Cheers now. So without Chamath here, I just want to talk a little bit. Have you guys watched what happened with Peloton and the CFO coming in and just really revitalizing that business very quickly?
By the way, Jason, I'll say one thing. I think 2 weeks ago, if you polled the market, there would probably have, or if you looked at the trading prices of bonds, you probably would have assumed a 95% chance of a 0.5 point rate hike in March. And as of today, my guess is that the probability of that is below 5%. And you're probably assuming, a 0.25 point rate hike, or maybe even a deferral at this point. And I think that's one of the things that's keeping the market up instead of tanking so much. This morning,
people are predicting that it's been such bad news that they'll push it out.
Yeah, they're assuming that under the conditions of great uncertainty like this, the Fed cannot act as aggressively as they were planning to act.
Interesting.
And as a result, that rate hike would be pushed out, and it would continue to kind of keep prices somewhat inflated and continue to support the market with cheaper capital and liquidity. So, a lot of capital around the world is going to get locked up as armed conflict kind of comes to bear. And when that happens, markets will tighten up and prices will be affected. And so the Fed in typical times would want to have an incentive or would have a motivation to, inject liquidity into the markets. And so this is not a great time to do a 0.5 point rate hike. And so it's almost certain at this point that they're not going to do a 0.5 point rate hike.
Feels to me like huge setup right now. People have capitulated. The market's gotten demolished.
I just think
these companies are still great. Like Zoom is still a great company.
There's some great businesses out there and some great companies to invest in, some great stocks to buy, all the way from technology through to industrials, through to even some of the energy companies that are going to benefit greatly from this commodity cycle we're kind of in the middle of. And so there's going to be, I think an opportunity to move away from speculative behavior into real kind of cherry picking, productive, cash generating businesses in the next, or even growth businesses that are actual, value creators. So versus being like 10-year speculative kind of bets. So this is a great time to kind of be looking for businesses you really like to own, to identify them, to make investments, and to hold those investments for a very long period of time. You're not going to find a lot of market conditions like this. I mean, if we all went back to March of 2020 and you remember the S&P was at 2,300.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to buy Disney. I never got around to it.
Yeah, so like if at that point you pick businesses that you knew were going to be durable businesses and that you loved and you thought were going to have legs to them, you bought everything from Alphabet to Disney to Lockheed Martin, you could have done tremendously well. So now's a great time to kind of be looking for businesses that you really like and to buy a stake in them.
Yeah.
Forget about trying to time the bottom. That's a fool's errand.
Right. No. If you want to buy stuff, you want to hold for 10 years.
Things are relatively cheap relative to a time horizon, that Sacks pointed out and Gerstner pointed out. So things are relatively cheap. Find businesses you like to own and buy them cheap.
They could get cheaper, but they're kind of at the bottom end of normal.
I think the whole time frame around like speculative stuff is kind of wiped out. Like I think that era is gone now.
What are you saying, Zach?
Well, it's that plus I think one of the things that happened is that people are realizing now that the burst of activity, especially like in e-commerce type companies that happened during the pandemic, that was not ongoing sustainable growth. It was one-time growth. In fact, in many cases, it was sort of worse than one-time growth, which is it was pull forward growth, meaning that growth in the future will be lower because you pulled forward all of that revenue. Well, I think Peloton might be a good example. I mean, everyone bought them during the pandemic, but then after the pandemic, everyone who needs one has got one already. So
could also be cars, right? Like people were desperate to buy cars and now there's none available.
Right. So what happened is not only have multiples gone down, but these companies were being comped based on growth rates that were unsustainable. And so now they're all revising their forecasts down. So it's the double whammy. And Brad's made this point. But what's interesting right now is the markets are actually rallying. And I think it might be because of this latest Biden news at this press conference. So the important point here is that Biden did not sanction Putin directly. There was talk about sanctioning him personally. And he also did not remove Russia from the SWIFT system, which is like sort of the key banking system. And I don't know if this is because Biden doesn't want to do it or because Europe won't support the move. Pretty clear Europe doesn't want to do it. So no one is willing to suffer too much economic loss here to defend Ukraine, never mind sending troops. So it seems to me that the signal here is that both militarily and in terms of economic interest, Europe does not want further escalation, and that may be why the market is rallying. Also, the Fed may hold off on interest rate increases while this is all going on. So, sometimes markets can act in funny ways.
Well, they're forward-looking. People are putting money at stake, so they have skin in the game. So it's, people can talk all they want about what's going to happen with the markets, but unless they're placing bets, that's kind of cheap talk. And here, people are actually placing bets on stocks they think will do well in the future.
Skin in the game. People, look, their economic interests are skin in the game. Having people's sons and daughters go off to fight and die in some foreign war, that is real skin in the game. What is not skin in the game is people tweeting, their moral 100%. Outrage and condemnation and whipping things up. And, we should not be listening to and calling everyone who disagrees with them traitors, because that's happening too. this is a time for cooler heads to prevail.
You and I are going to actually agree on this. And we're both going to agree that Trump and Pompeo should not be fawning over Putin.
Yeah, but Jason,
you never commented on that. People want to hear us get into it. Well, I mean, you can't support them fawning over Putin like that. Do you? I can't imagine you do.
Look, I heard what Trump said when he was saying. I didn't hear the Pompeo quote, so I can't speak to that. The Trump
saying he's a genius.
Look, listen, sometimes Trump is being sarcastic when he says things like, "Oh, what a beauty," He means the opposite. And I think the point Trump was making wasn't really about Putin being so great. The point I heard Trump making was that if he were president, this wouldn't be happening. Now, you can disagree with that. It may be true or untrue, but that was the real point he was making. I think that you're letting, the political partisans try to whip this thing up. And it's part of this meme of anybody who doesn't support what I want must be a traitor and must be in the pocket of Putin.
We have to use this meme warfare to get people, Friedberg, to shame these politicians into backing like the solar plan and doing something meaningful like this, and backing nuclear. How do we get the politicians to reflect energy independence as a priority? It feels like it's not a priority for them.
Well, I mean, one of the good things about American democracy is that politicians are generally pretty responsive to what their constituents want and believe. So they use polling data, and that polling data drives, if they want to get reelected, they better do what the polls are telling them people want them to do. And so ultimately, if you can kind of influence people broadly in the United States, and that can go both ways, by the way.
We have special interests too, and you have people with weird ideas, right? Like
but generally, if something is deeply unpopular, a politician risks not getting reelected. They're not going to kind of run to do that. And if something is very popular, even though it may not be the right thing by some objective framework, they would still run to do that. So, I do think that there's some degree of work to be done around, framing for people broadly, via the work maybe that we do on our podcast, but I think more importantly, on a repeated way and in a way that's kind of inspiring and inclusive, will drive people to kind of want to see these changes happen, and ultimately politicians should respond.
Can I make one other point to your thing about, who today would be considered, in the words of Jen Psaki, parroting Russian talking points? Barack Obama. If Obama today were out there saying exactly what he told the Atlantic magazine back in, I think it was 2012 or 14, if he was saying that today, he'd be accused of being in Putin's pocket and being a Putin apologist and a traitor and all this kind of stuff, because he said that in that interview, he said, listen, Putin was always very businesslike. He was punctual. He showed up. He wanted to negotiate and deal. Basically, he sounded like a guy who, look, we may disagree with him about everything, but he wasn't a madman. He was someone you could talk to. A
rational actor.
He was a coldly ruthless but rational actor. And that's basically what Obama said. He's someone you could talk turkey with. And if you say that today, that, hey, maybe we could negotiate our way out of this with Putin, you're accused of being, a puppet of his.
Yeah. The concept of starting a war in this day and age is just, it's crazy. And it is crazy that he's starting this war and putting all these people at risk, and we don't even know what the goal is.
You guys,
he's not even asked for anything. What is he exactly asking for? So he may have been rational then, or maybe Obama was trying to steer him towards rationality and praising him publicly to get that more rational Putin to show up. This feels like irrational, that we don't know what his goal is. The fact that the world can't say, if we gave him X, he would do Y, is, I think, his strategy. Putin's always liked to be this unpredictable madman, right?
No, I mean, we just said that he's a coldly ruthless, rational actor. That's sort of the opposite of a madman. I mean, his red lines have been clear. He's been stating them for years. The problem is that, again, we're conducting...
Well, I'm referring him to murdering opponents of his and...
Oh, there's no question that he's ruthless. He's an authoritarian. Call him a dictator if you want. I've tweeted in support of Alexei Navalny.
Yeah.
So I get it, but that doesn't mean he's a madman. He has desires and interests. And it's the job of diplomats to figure out how to conduct diplomacy and negotiation with people you disagree with.
Yeah.
And one of the problems we have today is, again, we've Twitterized everything. So, we basically figure out the first step is who are the people who should be canceled? Who's wearing the white hat? Who's wearing the black hat? Let's all rise up in virtue signal and moral denunciation and, stick our fingers in our ears and not listen to the other side. And, and listen, that is a way to find yourself in greater conflicts, not avoid them.
Yeah. All right. So just wrapping up here, let's wrap with Sacks's favorite part of the show. Sacks's favorite moment where he's super engaged and learning. He's got his thinking cap on. He's taking notes. And that is the Science Corner. No, not.
What about Vendetta Corner? I thought you were going to say Vendetta Corner.
Yeah, what about, is there anything on your Vendetta Corner this week?
Vendetta Corner is actually my favorite part of the show.
It is now. People love Vendetta Corner in the Twitter community spaces.
Of course, Twitter loves it because Twitter is all about vendettas. But I have no vendettas this week.
Vendetta-free week?
The vendetta-free week.
What are you doing with your time?
Yeah.
I'm trying to advocate that this is time for cooler heads prevail. And so...
oh, for fuck's sake, start a fight with somebody. Aren't you fighting with Paul Graham? There's nobody you're
You and Jake aren't fighting this week? Are you guys taking the week off for ski week?
I don't think we're fighting over anything. It's not that I can think of. All right. For the dictator, Chamath Palihapitiya, the Sultan of Science, David Friedberg, and the Rain Man himself, David Sacks, I'm Jake Al, and we'll see you all at the All In Summit